Welcome to this explainer. We are jumping right into a pretty wild paradox today, one that plagues hospitals, boardrooms, and honestly just our everyday lives. You know what I'm talking about. Why is it that incredibly brilliant people, like individuals with just off-the-charts intelligence, often make the absolute most catastrophic life choices? Think of that genius tech founder who somehow manages to alienate their entire team, or the brilliant surgeon who falls for a completely obvious financial scam. It happens all the time, right? So let's dive into this central mystery. Why can someone with a genius-level IQ and a literal wall full of Ivy League credentials fail so spectacularly at making a basic ethical or personal decision? Especially when, at the exact same time, someone else with completely average intelligence can navigate impossible, emotionally charged situations with this clarity that almost borders on the supernatural. What is that second person using that the genius lacks? Well, it's not just street smarts or even emotional intelligence. It's something much more specific and, biologically speaking, much stranger. It is wisdom. But to really get to the bottom of this, we've got to aggressively dismantle some culturally accepted myths. We kind of grew up thinking wisdom is this passive collection of traits, right? Like, we just assume it automatically shows up as we get older, or if we read more books, or if we just have a lot of raw cognitive horsepower. But the science tells a totally different story. Wisdom is actually a dynamic network of metacognitive processes. It's an active, shifting state of mind. It is definitely not a permanent badge you just earn and get to wear forever. To put this into perspective, research reveals a fascinating, honestly almost shocking data point. The empirical correlation between intelligence and wisdom, it's just 0.15. I mean, that is so weak it's practically background noise. This definitively proves that having a brain like an encyclopedia doesn't make you inherently wise. Even the most advanced high-processing AI systems aren't inherently wise. Sheer human brain power just does not guarantee wisdom. You literally cannot outthink your way to being a wise person just by having a high IQ. And that brings us to some groundbreaking work by psychologist Igor Grossman, who fundamentally reframes this whole concept. He suggests that there is actually no such thing as a wise person. There are only wise moments. It's this fleeting, biologically expensive state of mind that depends entirely on your context, your emotional state, and who you're interacting with. So the exact same person giving just breathtakingly wise advice to a friend on a Tuesday can turn around and make a spectacular cognitive mess of their own life on Wednesday. Okay, so what exactly is lighting up in the brain during these fleeting moments? Most people assume it's just the prefrontal cortex, the logical brain, simply shutting down our emotional limbic system. But actually, scratch that. It's a highly complex, coordinated dance. Wisdom requires multi-network activation. It simultaneously recruits the medial prefrontal cortex for social processing, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex for focused attention, and this is the crucial part, the anterior cingulate cortex for detecting conflicts. The really big takeaway here is that wisdom is a frontolimbic equilibrium. It is not an override. The wise brain doesn't just use logic to aggressively silence emotion. Instead, that anterior cingulate cortex we just talked about, it notices a conflict between what you deeply feel and what you logically know, and it literally holds that conflict open. It integrates them so fluidly that the resulting decision is neither purely rational nor purely emotional. It becomes something entirely different and just beautifully calibrated. But here's the catch. Holding that conflict open is physiologically exhausting. It requires massive brain power. And this brilliantly explains why wisdom so often vanishes right when we need it the most. When we're under active pressure, our task-positive network is firing, which surprisingly disrupts and suppresses wise reasoning. But when we're daydreaming or seemingly doing nothing, our default mode network activates, which reveals a pretty disturbing truth for all the productivity optimists out there. The deep architecture required for wisdom is quietly built during our brain's downtime. So it turns out the capacity to give profound advice isn't built in those high-stakes pressure cooker moments. As researchers put it, wisdom is essentially deposited layer by layer in the silences between crises. The ability to truly engage with another person's dilemma relies heavily on the rich, self-referential processing that we cultivate when we're, say, staring out a window or taking a walk without checking our phones every 5 seconds. The quality of your thinking under pressure is literally built in the quiet hours you spend not actively performing. And this resting brain state is exactly what allows us to unlock the most critical concept in modern wisdom science. Are you ready for a massive term? Here it is. Perspectival metacognition. Understanding this is absolutely essential. Metacognition is just thinking about your own thinking, but perspectival metacognition means stepping completely outside your own cognitive tunnel. It is the ability to examine your own biases, emotions, and thoughts from a perspective that is genuinely entirely separate from your habitual, self-centered viewpoint.
It's the difference between desperately asking, why is this happening to me, versus calmly asking, how would a stranger view this situation? When researchers in the Wise Judgment Consortium looked at this across 15 different countries, they identified 4 core features of wise reasoning: intellectual humility, recognizing uncertainty, taking broader perspectives, and the search for compromise. Notice something about this list. You can't study for these in a textbook. You can't improve them just by cramming more information into your head. They are actual mental movements away from your ego and toward the actual objective structure of a situation. And right here is where we hit a highly counterintuitive fact. The more confident and certain you are in a crisis, the less access you have to those 4 cognitive moves we just explored. If you walk into a situation absolutely certain that you already know the answer, you immediately foreclose the mental flexibility that wisdom requires. Certainty and wisdom are not allies. Structurally speaking, they are bitter enemies. This biological necessity for uncertainty actually explains a glaring flaw in our modern artificial intelligence, too. We have built AI systems with unprecedented cognitive power, systems that can process mountains of data in mere seconds. But fundamentally, AI lacks the metacognitive capacity to recognize the limits of its own knowledge. It cannot genuinely take another's perspective or tolerate ambiguity. Therefore, in the exact ways that matter most to human survival, these superintelligent systems remain profoundly unwise. There is a deep paradox happening here. You see, our brain is naturally a prediction machine that absolutely hates ambiguity. It literally treats unresolved uncertainty as a biological threat and will panic, often inventing premature certainty just to feel safe again. This is exactly why confidently wrong individuals in leadership or medicine are so incredibly dangerous. They shut down inquiry just to feel secure. The wise mind, however, tolerates the open loop. It manages to remain functional and calm while resting right there in the uncertainty. So, this brings up a huge question. If we know that wisdom isn't tied to high intelligence, it doesn't automatically come with age, and it requires this incredibly difficult tolerance for uncertainty, how on earth do we intentionally build this elusive neural infrastructure in our daily lives? If it's a fleeting state, how do we actively train our brains to access it more often? Well, one of the most rigorously validated methods comes again from Igor Grossman's research. It's called the distanced self-reflection method. When you face a dilemma, you completely shift your language away from I feel or I want. Instead, you use the third person. You ask an outside observer question like, what is Solomon seeing? This is named after the biblical King Solomon, who was famous for giving incredibly wise advice to others, but whose own personal life was, frankly, a total disaster. This simple linguistic shift decouples our self-referential processing from our amygdala's threat response. It creates immediate distance, reduces negative emotion, and vastly improves our reasoning. And clinical research backs this up beautifully. For example, long-term Vipassana meditators show structural brain alignment that perfectly matches this exact wise state. But here's the thing. They aren't forcefully concentrating. They are practicing receptive, open-field awareness, essentially becoming an impartial witness to their own mind. This proves that wisdom isn't some final destination you magically arrive at. It is an ongoing, daily practice of maintaining this receptive brain state. Now, all of this leads to a rather uncomfortable realization about the society we're living in today. Based on everything we've seen, the modern information economy is essentially designed to actively degrade our capacity for wisdom. Seriously, think about it. Every single smartphone notification, every endless news cycle, every algorithm optimized to stimulate your brain. It is a direct attack on your default mode network. We are constantly robbing ourselves of the quiet downtime our brains desperately need to build the resting state architecture required for wise judgment. Which leaves us with a final, incredibly provocative thought to chew on. If wisdom requires the practice of genuine uncertainty, downtime, and perspectival distance, yet our educational, technological, and economic systems reward the exact opposite, the constant performance of certainty and endless cognitive overload, are we choosing to build a world that structurally dismantles the most consequential cognitive capacity our species possesses? It's a massive question. And honestly, it's one worth taking some quiet, uninterrupted time to reflect on today.